Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are diving into the PACE trial controversy.
Thanks for having me back. I am really excited to get into this one because it is wild.
Yeah, it really is. So just to set the stage for you, the listener, I want you to imagine something for a second.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Right. So imagine you're taking this massive, highly consequential test.
Like a college entrance exam or something.
Exactly. Like thousands of lives are hanging in the balance based on how you do. So you take the test, you look at your answers, and you realize, uh-oh, you did terribly.
A total disaster of a score.
Total disaster. But then the people running the test tell you, hey, no problem, you're actually allowed to just, change the grading rubric after the fact.
Which is just crazy.
Right. So if you scored like a 50%, you just cross out the rules with a red pen and write 50% is now an A+.
It sounds like, I don't know, a plot from some satirical novel about academic corruption.
Yeah, it really does.
But the wild thing is, this actually happened in the real world.
It did. And we are talking about a global medical establishment spending £5 million, £5 million, to supposedly cure a debilitating illness.
Right, and their grand cure essentially amounted to, well, handing sick patients a promotional newsletter and telling them to just walk it off.
Which is just, it's one of the most astonishing statistical illusions in modern medicine.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today we're unpacking this profound difference between how science is supposed to work, how they teach it to you in 8th grade science class.
Right, the scientific method.
Exactly. Versus what frequently happens when human egos, secretive data, and just fundamentally flawed testing get in the way.
Because when these highly prestigious institutions invest millions into a specific narrative, reversing course becomes basically impossible for them.
Oh, absolutely. The institutional inertia is just massive.
And the stakes here, for you listening, they go way beyond just this one single study.
Yeah, this is about what happens when patients, the very people this multi-million-dollar treatment is supposed to help, start loudly reporting that the treatment is actually causing permanent physical harm.
Yeah, they're saying, hey, this is hurting us.
And the institutions designed to protect them just, cover their ears and hide the data.
It's terrifying. So to understand how this massive institutional failure happened, we really need to start by understanding the specific condition we're talking about today.
Right, the illness at the center of this whole firestorm.
So tell us about this exhaustion illness, because it's not just being tired.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. Calling it exhaustion is, honestly, it's almost misleading.
How so?
Well, think about it like this. If you or I run a marathon, or we pull an all-nighter, we feel exhausted.
Sure, I feel like a zombie after an all-nighter.
Exactly. But our bodies have this predictable mechanism for recovery. We eat a big meal, we sleep for 12 hours, and our energy reserves just replenish.
Right, the biological battery pack recharges.
Exactly, the battery recharges. But for people with this specific condition, the charging mechanism itself seems to be fundamentally broken.
Wow, so they just can't recharge.
Right. What happens is a complete physiological crash following even minor exertion.
Wait, minor exertion? Like what? Like jogging around the block?
No, I mean everyday activities. Things like taking a shower or standing up to cook a quick meal, or honestly, even just processing a complex conversation.
You mean just talking can cause a crash?
Yes, cognitive effort drains the battery too. And for a person with this illness, that minor expenditure of energy triggers a severe worsening of all their symptoms.
That's awful.
It leaves them completely bedbound for weeks, sometimes even months, just from pushing themselves a tiny bit too far.
Okay, so that severe crash after basically doing nothing, that is the defining hallmark of this illness.
Exactly. The body's cellular energy production is compromised. It's a severe energy impairment.
So it stands to reason that any approach to treating this condition has to, respect that biological reality.
You would think so. But that brings us to the year 2005.
2005, in the United Kingdom.
Right. And the launch of this massive, massive clinical trial.
The £5 million experiment.
Yes. Which, by the way, is just an astronomical sum of money for clinical research in this specific field.
£5 million buys a lot of influence, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And the source of that funding, where that money came from, is incredibly telling.
Right, because follow the money, always. Where did it come from?
Well, a large chunk of it came from the government's standard medical research department, which is normal.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the other major financial backer was the specific government department responsible for managing sickness and disability benefits.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the department that pays people when they are too sick to work funded a study to find a cure.
You see the conflict there, right?
Yeah, that funding structure introduces a really fascinating and maybe terrifying set of incentives.
Because when you look at how governments manage disability programs, the financial liability is just enormous.
Right, if you have hundreds of thousands of citizens too sick to work, the government is on the hook for massive long-term financial support.
Exactly. So from their perspective, there is this powerful, undeniable financial imperative to find a quick, really inexpensive way to categorize these patients as curable.
Right, they want to get them off the disability rolls and push them back into the workforce.
Precisely. If your primary goal is to shrink that disability budget, you aren't going to fund decades of slow, expensive research into cellular biology.
Yeah, you're not looking for the actual deep biological cure. You're looking for a quick fix.
Right, a behavioral fix.
Yeah.
You want a treatment that is cheap to administer and that scales easily across the whole country.
Which explains so much about the incredibly controversial nature of the two treatments they decided to test with this massive budget.
It really does. So the researchers designed this trial to test two main interventions, and they did this alongside standard medical care.
Okay, so what were the two interventions? What was the theory driving them?
Well, the theory was rooted in a very specific psychological framework.
Wait, psychological? I thought we just said this was a physical energy impairment illness.
We did. But the underlying assumption of these researchers wasn't that the patients had an ongoing biological disease.
So what did they think was wrong with them?
They actually hypothesized that the illness was being perpetuated by the patient's own beliefs and behaviors.
You're kidding. So they thought it was all in their heads.
Pretty much. And so, the first treatment they deployed was a highly structured form of talk therapy.
Talk therapy, like for a physical illness that causes your body to crash after taking a shower.
Yes. And this wasn't just general counseling to help someone cope with the stress of being chronically sick, which would be normal.
Right. Therapy to help deal with a chronic illness is great.
But that wasn't this. The goal of this specific talk therapy was to actively convince the patients that they were no longer physically ill.
Wait, really? To convince them they weren't sick?
Yeah. The theory suggested that, sure, maybe a severe virus triggered the initial sickness years ago.
Okay, like a post-viral thing.
Right. But they claimed the virus was long gone. And the only reason the patients were still feeling sick, according to this theory, was because they had developed an intense, irrational fear of physical activity.
A fear of activity. So the theory was treating a severe physical illness like it's just a phobia.
That's exactly it. The clinical approach was heavily focused on altering the patient's belief system.
That is wild. So how did that actually look in the therapist's office?
Well, the therapists were instructed to directly challenge the patient's perception of their own symptoms.
Okay, give me an example.
So if a patient came in and said, "I feel terrible today, my muscles ache, I am dizzy, I can barely stand," the therapist's job was to reframe that
Reframe it how?
by suggesting to the patient that it was merely a sign of being out of shape, rather than a symptom of a biological disease.
Wow. So gaslighting, basically. Telling them their physical pain is just because they haven't been to the gym lately.
Essentially, yes. Which sets the perfect stage for the second prong of this trial.
Okay, so first is the talk therapy to erase the so-called fear. What's the second treatment?
Well, if the talk therapy is meant to erase the fear of activity, the physical treatment had to actually force that activity.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they prescribed a strict regimen of gradual exercise.
Gradual exercise for people who physically crash when they exert themselves.
Exactly. The protocol was incredibly rigid. Patients were instructed to slowly, but continuously, increase their physical activity day by day.
So just keep doing a little bit more no matter what.
Right. And the crucial element here, the really dangerous part, was that patients were told to push through their symptoms.
To ignore the fact that their body is shutting down.
Yes. The underlying assumption was that their bodies were just, quote-unquote, deconditioned.
Deconditioned, meaning they're just out of shape from resting too much.
That was the theory, that because they rested so much, their muscles weakened. And this deconditioning was the true cause of their pain and fatigue.
That is just, I have to use an analogy here for the listener.
Oh, for it.
It's like telling someone with a compound fracture in their leg, a literal broken leg, that their real problem is an irrational fear of walking.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. And telling them they just need to run a little bit further on that broken bone every single day to get over the fear of the pain.
It is exactly like that.
Yeah.
And patient advocacy groups, they recognize that danger immediately.
I bet they did. Because they live with it.
Right. because the core defining symptom of this illness is that physical exertion causes a catastrophic systemic crash.
Yeah, if you have an illness where the primary characteristic is severe intolerance to exertion, prescribing forced, escalating exertion is it's counterintuitive at best.
And deeply negligent at worst. Another way to look at it, it's akin to treating a severe peanut allergy by forcing a patient to eat slightly more peanut butter every single day.
Operating under the assumption that their throat closing up is just them being anxious. Oh my gosh. If your biological battery is fundamentally broken, purposefully draining it down to zero doesn't train it to hold a better charge.
No, it does not.
It just leaves you with a dead battery.
A completely dead battery.
So we have this 5 million pound study. It's backed by a government department that's eager to cut disability costs. And they are testing a theory that tells physically ill people they just have flawed beliefs and need to exercise more.
That is the setup, yes.
So how on earth do you actually design a scientific test to prove something that absurd?
Well, the trial design is where this whole thing goes from a questionable theory to where the scientific method basically just unravels completely.
Okay, break this down for me. How did they mess up the science?
To really grasp the structural flaw here, we have to talk to the listener about the concept of blinding in medical research.
Right, the gold standard of science. Blinding.
Let's use an 8th grade analogy.
Yeah.
Think about a basic blind taste test.
Like the Cola Wars.
Exactly. If you set out 2 cups of soda, and one is branded with a famous, highly marketed logo, and the other is just in a plain, unlabeled cup.
Human psychology is super predictable here.
Highly predictable. The vast majority of people will claim the branded soda tastes better even if the liquid inside the cups is identical.
Because our expectations and our biases literally alter our sensory perception. If we think it's the good stuff, it tastes like the good stuff.
That is the entire reason the placebo effect exists.
Yeah.
And it's why good medical drug trials always use sugar pills.
Right, so if you're testing a new migraine medication, you give half the group the real drug and half the group a fake pill, but you don't tell anyone who did what.
Exactly. And then, if the people taking the real pill show significantly more improvement than the people taking the fake pill, then you can confidently say, okay, the chemistry of the drug actually worked.
It wasn't just the power of positive thinking.
Right. But the structural crisis of this exhaustion illness trial is that you cannot blind these specific treatments.
Oh, of course. You can't give someone a placebo talk therapy session.
Exactly. A patient knows if they are sitting in a therapist's office having a conversation about their beliefs.
And they definitely know if they are walking on a treadmill for a gradual exercise program.
Right. You cannot administer a placebo workout.
Yeah.
So every single patient receiving these interventions was fully aware that they were receiving the heavily publicized, multi-million-pound new treatments.
Which means the patient's expectations were entirely compromised from day one. They knew they were getting the VIP treatment.
Absolutely. And if you know you can't blind the patients, the only scientifically sound way to measure their progress is to use incredibly strict, objective measurements.
Right, hard data, like using fitness trackers to measure their actual daily steps.
Or heart rate monitors. Or looking at their ability to return to full-time employment, or getting off disability benefits.
I need metrics that the human brain just cannot consciously or subconsciously fake.
But here's the kicker. Despite the total absence of blinding, the researchers chose to rely almost entirely on subjective questionnaires to measure the primary outcomes.
Wait, what? Subjective questionnaires?
Yes. The ultimate determination of whether a patient was deemed, quote, cured or recovered came down to handing them a piece of paper and asking them to rate how they felt on a scale.
That is, they took a trial group that was acutely aware they were getting a special government treatment, a group primed for a massive placebo response. And they just asked them to subjectively rate their own feelings.
That's exactly what they did. But it gets even worse. The cultivation of that placebo response was actually actively woven into the trial itself.
How so? What did they do?
Well, documentation from the study reveals that while the trial was ongoing, the researchers literally distributed a newsletter to the participants.
A newsletter? Like a schedule update?
No, this wasn't some sterile administrative document. This newsletter contained glowing testimonials from other patients.
You have got to be kidding me.
I'm not. The testimonials specifically praised how life-changing and effective the talk therapy and gradual exercise treatments were.
During the trial?
During the trial.
That is astonishing. They are handing out marketing material bragging about the success of the treatment, while simultaneously asking the patients to fill out subjective surveys measuring the success of the treatment.
It's hard to believe that, yes.
You are actively training the participants to give you the answers you want to hear. It's like conducting that blind taste test. But right before the person takes a sip of the branded soda, the researcher whispers in their ear, "Hey, everyone else thinks this one is a miracle."
It completely invalidates the subjective scores. It introduces an insurmountable level of bias.
I am just floored by that.
But the subjective questionnaires and the promotional newsletters, those are actually merely the prelude to the most severe scientific violation in this entire controversy.
Wait, there's something worse than handing out glowing testimonials during a trial?
Oh, yes. The absolute core of this scandal revolves around a practice known in science as moving the goalpost.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of moving the goalposts in clinical setting. Explain this for us.
So, in rigorous scientific research, before you ever enroll a single patient, before you collect a single piece of data, you are required to publish what's called a finalized protocol.
Like a rule book.
Exactly. A strict, inflexible rulebook. It dictates exactly what metrics you will use to measure success and precisely what numerical thresholds will define a patient as, say, recovered.
Right, you have to lock that in so you can't cheat later.
Exactly. Establishing these rules in advance is your primary defense against confirmation bias. It prevents researchers from looking at disappointing data later on and just subtly tweaking the definition of success to manufacture a positive outcome.
Right, it's like you have to paint the bullseye on the wall before you shoot the arrow.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Because if you shoot the arrow first, and then you walk up with the paintbrush and paint the rings around wherever it happened to land, you haven't proven you are a good archer. You've just proven you own a paintbrush.
I love that analogy. And that is exactly what happened here. Midway through this massive trial, the researchers reviewed their accumulating data.
They peeked at the answers.
They did. And for reasons they later attributed to various, quote, methodological adjustments, they decided to completely rewrite the rulebook.
They moved the goalposts.
They moved them drastically. They published a revised analysis plan that significantly lowered the numerical thresholds required for a patient to be categorized as having normal physical function and being recovered.
Okay, to understand just how egregious this is, we have to look at the actual math they used. How drastic was this rule change?
Okay, so the researchers used a standard, widely recognized subjective questionnaire to measure physical function. And this is scored on a scale from 0 to 100.
0 to 100. Simple enough.
Right. A score of 100 represents optimal, perfect health, while lower scores indicate severe limitation.
Got it.
So in the original strict rulebook they published before the trial, a patient had to score an 85 or higher to be considered recovered and having normal physical function.
Which makes sense. An 85 is a completely reasonable baseline for a healthy adult.
Right. An 85 means you can walk a few blocks, you can carry your groceries, climb a flight of stairs without collapsing.
It's just a standard functioning life.
Exactly. But under the revised rules they published mid-study, they dropped that recovery threshold all the way down to a score of 60.
A score of 60? Wait, what does a 60 actually represent in the real world on this scale?
Well, if you look at population studies using this specific scale, a physical function score of 60 is roughly equivalent to the average physical capability of an 85-year-old adult.
You're joking.
Or someone suffering from significant chronic health issues, like congestive heart failure.
Are you serious? They redefined normal physical function and recovery for young, working-age adults to match the physical capacity of an elderly person with a heart condition.
They did, but the mathematical absurdity goes even deeper than that.
How could it be worse than that?
Because they lowered the threshold for recovery so drastically, it actually created a logical paradox within the trial's own data.
A paradox?
Yeah.
Like an impossible situation?
Yes. Remember, to even get into the trial, you had to prove you were severely disabled.
Right.
Well, when the trial began, patients had to score a 65 or lower on that exact same scale just to prove they were disabled enough to qualify for the experiment.
Wait. The entry requirement for being severely sick was a 65 or lower.
Yes.
But the newly invented finish line for being totally recovered was a 60.
That is correct.
That means that under the revised rules, a patient could score a 62 on day one.
Yeah.
And according to the entry rules, that 62 means they are profoundly disabled and urgently need a £5 million government intervention.
Exactly.
But according to the new outcome rules, that exact same 62 means they are a stunning medical success story with normal physical function.
You've got it. It is a literal
A
impossibility.
person cannot be simultaneously broken and fixed. The math is completely, fundamentally broken.
It really is. In fact, under these new rules, roughly 13% of the patients were considered mathematically recovered on the very first day they walked into the clinic.
Before they received a single minute of therapy or exercise.
Yes, they met the criteria for normal physical function before the trial even started for them.
That is, okay, I'm thinking of another analogy. That's like saying an 8th grade student is simultaneously failing a math class so badly that they are required to take summer school, but their failing grade is also mathematically high enough to put them on the honor roll.
It's exactly like that. By establishing a passing grade that was actually lower than the entry requirement, the trial design essentially guaranteed that any minor subjective fluctuation in a patient's self-reported score would make them look like a success.
Right. If you hand them a glowing newsletter, they might feel a tiny bit more optimistic that day, rate themselves 2 points higher, and boom, they cross this artificially depressed finish line.
Exactly. The placebo effect alone was enough to push them over the edge into the recovered category.
Okay, given how glaring these mathematical impossibilities are, the scientific community must have rejected the findings immediately upon publication. Right. I mean, the peer review process is designed specifically to catch this exact kind of statistical manipulation.
You would hope so. But the reality of the academic publishing world is often far less rigorous than the general public assumes.
Oh no, don't tell me this got published.
In 2011, the researchers published their findings in some of the most elite, highly esteemed medical journals on the entire planet.
Really? Top medical journals?
Yes, and the headline claims they made were just staggering. The researchers proudly announced to the world that an incredible 60% of patients showed significant improvement,
60%.
and that 22% had achieved full recovery.
22% fully cured, based on math where you could be sick and cured at the same time.
Exactly. And when a study carries the seal of approval from these top-tier journals, and it has the backing of a major government medical council, it ceases to be just a scientific paper.
All right, it becomes institutional dogma, becomes the unquestioned truth.
Exactly. The impact was instantaneous and global. Medical textbooks all over the world were rewritten.
Wow.
Public health guidelines across the globe, from the UK to the United States, updated their official recommendations.
Based on this one flawed study.
Almost overnight, talk therapy designed to alter illness beliefs, combined with forced gradual exercise, became the unquestioned gold standard of care for this severe exhaustion illness.
Which, if we remember the biology of this illness, created an absolute nightmare scenario in clinics around the world.
A total nightmare. Because doctors, who were just trusting the prestigious journals, began heavily prescribing the exact two interventions that patients inherently knew caused their bodies to crash.
The disconnect between the published data and the lived reality of the patients must have been catastrophic.
It was. While the scientific establishment and the researchers were taking victory laps and issuing press releases about their groundbreaking cure, massive patient surveys were painting a horrifying picture.
The patients were pushing back.
Loudly. Patients were reporting that the mandated gradual exercise programs were inducing severe, cascading physical deterioration.
Because the patients were following their doctor's orders, they were being good patients, pushing through the pain, trying to exercise away their quote-unquote deconditioning.
And the biological reality of their illness was kicking in.
They weren't getting stronger. Their cellular batteries were being permanently damaged.
Yes. People who were previously able to manage, say, part-time work, were becoming completely housebound.
Oh, that's tragic.
People who could walk short distances before the treatment were ending up in wheelchairs or confined to dark rooms, completely unable to tolerate light or sound.
And how did the medical establishment react to these patients getting worse? Did they stop the treatments?
No. The institutional inertia was so strong that when patients reported this severe deterioration, the medical establishment frequently just blamed the patients themselves.
They blamed the patients for getting sicker.
Yes. Because the logic of the trial had become absolute. The thinking was, if the treatment is scientifically proven to work and the patient is getting worse, well, then the patient must not be trying hard enough,
Or they are just willfully holding on to their irrational fear of activity.
Exactly. It is the ultimate medical gaslighting.
It really is. And this is the moment in the story where things shift, right? It goes from being a story about institutional failure to a really remarkable grassroots uprising.
It does. Because the patient community, despite being profoundly physically compromised, they realized that the academic establishment was not going to save them.
They had to save themselves.
Right. And this resistance really found a focal point in a man named Alem Matthees.
Alem Matthees. Tell us about him.
So Alem is an Australian citizen, and he suffers from an incredibly severe presentation of this exact exhaustion illness.
So he knows firsthand what this is like.
Intimately. His daily reality is stark. His energy limits are so constrained that he is entirely bedbound. He relies on his parents as full-time caretakers for his basic survival.
That is just heartbreaking.
But here's the thing. Biological energy impairment does not equate to a lack of intellect.
Clearly not.
Alem is brilliant. He's methodical. And he possessed the analytical clarity to look at the published claims of this 5 million pound trial, read the papers, and recognize the mathematical sleight of hand.
He saw the goalposts move.
He did. And he knew that the only way to expose the illusion to the world was to get his hands on the raw data.
Okay, so what did he do? How does a bedbound guy in Australia take on a UK university?
In 2014, Alem initiated a formal legal process. He filed a public information request.
Okay, leveraging transparency laws.
Exactly. He used those laws to try and compel the university that sponsored the trial to release the raw, anonymized dataset.
Notice you said anonymized. He didn't want patient names.
No, not at all. He explicitly did not ask for names or addresses or any identifying medical history. He just simply requested the sterile, anonymous spreadsheet of numbers.
Why? What was he going to do with the numbers?
He wanted independent statisticians to be able to recalculate the results using the rigorous original rulebook, the one the researchers had abandoned midway through the study.
Which, by the way, is the foundational principle of science. Show your work.
Exactly.
I mean, if your multi-million-pound study is robust enough to rewrite global medical guidelines and dictate how insurance companies treat disabled people around the world, then your math should be able to withstand some independent scrutiny.
You would think.
Yeah.
But how do you think the university responded to this basic request for transparency?
I'm guessing they didn't just email him the spreadsheet.
No, they did not. The university launched an aggressive, heavily funded campaign to construct a wall of total secrecy. They categorically refused to release the anonymous numbers.
What possible legal or ethical justification could a publicly funded university offer for hiding the data of a publicly funded trial? That's taxpayer money.
Right. Well, they deployed a revolving door of defensive arguments, but their primary defense was an appeal to patient privacy.
Patient privacy. But Alem asked for anonymous data.
He did. But the university argued that even with all the names and identifying details stripped away, the release of an anonymous spreadsheet might somehow, theoretically, allow a malicious actor to deduce the identities of the participants.
Is that even realistic?
No. In a trial containing hundreds of patients, statistical experts consider this risk to be infinitesimally small, like almost non-existent.
It's a total smokescreen.
Completely. When institutions don't want to release data, crying privacy concerns is the easiest, most socially acceptable shield to hide behind.
Right, because nobody wants to be on the side of violating patient privacy. But when that privacy argument faced scrutiny, what did the university do?
They escalated their tactics in a really ugly way. They officially legally labeled Alem's request as vexatious.
Vexatious. What does that mean in legal terms?
In legal terminology, they were formally accusing this bedbound, severely ill man of being an obsessive harasser. They claimed he was utilizing the public information system purely to cause disruption and annoyance to the university.
Are you kidding me? They took a patient who was literally fighting for his life, asking to see the math that was being used to justify harmful treatments around the globe, and they smeared him as a bad faith troll.
That is exactly what they did. And the hypocrisy of their position is highlighted by a stunning revelation that's documented in the sources we reviewed for this deep dive.
Oh, laid on me. What did they do?
While the university was battling in court, claiming that the data was far too sensitive and dangerous to release to the public,
Yeah.
the original researchers were quietly sharing that exact same data set with a select group of their own colleagues and friends.
No.
Yes, they freely distributed the data to ideological allies. so those allies could co-author supportive spin-off papers.
That is infuriating. So the data is magically perfectly safe when you give it to a friend who promises to agree with your conclusions, but it is dangerously sensitive the moment a critic asks to check your math.
That's the reality of what happened.
That isn't science. That is a cartel protecting its monopoly on the narrative.
And the university was willing to spend massive amounts of taxpayer money to maintain that monopoly.
How much money are we talking about here?
The financial commitment to secrecy was staggering. Documentation reveals that the university spent roughly £250,000 of public money on high-powered legal fees.
£250,000.
Yes. Fighting a relentless war of attrition against a disabled patient solely to keep a spreadsheet of numbers out of the public domain.
£250,000 just to hide the math. I mean, that single fact is more damning than any statistical anomaly.
It really makes you wonder what they were hiding.
Right. If your data proves your miracle cure works, you publish it on a billboard. You shout it from the rooftops. You do not spend £250,000 of taxpayer money hiring lawyers to lock it in a vault.
It's a massive red flag. So this legal battle, it dragged on for years, demanding an extraordinary amount of effort from Alem.
I can't even imagine the toll that took on him.
But finally, in 2016, the dam broke. The case reached an information tribunal where a judge meticulously reviewed all of the university's arguments.
And what did the judge say?
The judge systematically dismantled the university's claims. He rejected the notion that the anonymized data posed any real privacy risk, and he completely dismissed the accusation that Alem was being vexatious.
Wow, a total validation for Alem.
Yeah, absolutely. The tribunal issued a legally binding order. The university must release the anonymized data to the public.
It is a monumental victory for open science. Just incredible. But, we cannot breeze past the devastating human cost of this victory.
No, we really can't.
Because the cognitive exertion required to read dense legal filings, to strategize arguments, to navigate a hostile bureaucratic system, that is a massive effort for a healthy person.
It is.
But for Alem, whose cellular battery crashes from minor cognitive effort, this multi-year legal war was catastrophic for his body.
It was. The physical toll of fighting this battle left his fragile health completely shattered. It further reduced his already severely limited capacity.
He traded what little physical function he had left to force an institution to tell the truth.
He did. It is an act of profound self-sacrifice, and it altered medical history.
Because what happened when the data came out?
The moment that data set was finally forced into the light, the landscape shifted dramatically.
Who looked at it?
Independent, world-renowned statisticians and researchers, experts operating entirely outside the ideological bubble of the original authors, people from institutions like Stanford University and University College London.
Heavy hitters.
Yes, they finally downloaded the numbers.
And what did they do with them? Did they invent some crazy new way to analyze it?
No, not at all. The independent experts didn't have to invent a new way to analyze the data. They just did the one thing the original authors refused to do.
Which was?
They took the raw numbers and ran them through the strict original rulebook, the protocol that was published before the goalposts were moved.
Ah, so what happens to a global medical miracle when you force it to actually play by its own original rules?
The miracle completely evaporates. When the independent scientists apply the original rigorous thresholds for success, the highly publicized claim of a 22% recovery rate just vanished.
Where did it go? What was the actual number?
The actual recovery rate dropped to near zero.
A 22% success rate reduced to statistical noise. That is unbelievable.
Furthermore, when the original rules were applied, the data revealed that there was essentially no statistically significant difference in recovery outcomes between the patients who endured the intense, controversial talk therapy and graded exercise programs and the control group of patients who simply received standard, basic medical advice to rest and manage their symptoms.
So let me get this straight. The £5 million study, the global headlines, the fundamental shift in medical guidelines that caused immense suffering for all those patients.
Yeah,
It was all constructed on a statistical mirage.
it was.
The treatments were fundamentally ineffective at curing the illness.
Completely ineffective. And the reaction from the independent scientific community was just a mixture of profound shock and scathing anger.
I would hope so. What did they say?
Well, a professor of biochemistry and genetics at Stanford publicly stated his absolute disbelief that a study with such glaring methodological manipulation ever made it past the peer review process of any reputable journal.
Right. How did the Lancet not catch this?
Exactly. And another highly respected emeritus professor of medicine offered an even more brutal assessment.
What does he say?
He stated that the trial's design flaws were so egregious, so fundamentally counter to the scientific method, that the study should be preserved and utilized in university textbooks.
As an example of what to do.
No, as the ultimate case study on how not to design a clinical trial.
Oh, wow. Ouch. When the highest echelons of the scientific establishment are looking at your life's work and calling it a textbook example of incompetence, I mean, how do the original authors possibly respond to that? They are cornered by their own raw data. They have to admit they were wrong, right?
You would think, but the psychological phenomenon of cognitive dissonance in academia is very powerful.
So they didn't back down.
No. To maintain balance here, we have to look at how they defended themselves. The original researchers, the lead professors who designed and championed the trial, they released statements digging in their heels. They maintained a stance of absolute defiance.
How do you define math?
Their rebuttal focused heavily on procedural technicalities. They publicly argued that the independent scientists who recalculate the data were relying on an outdated, quote, preliminary analysis plan, rather than the, quote, final approved plan.
Wait. The final approved plan is just academic spin for the new rules we invented halfway through the game to make ourselves look like winners.
That is exactly what the critics pointed out.
They are criticizing the independent experts for holding them to the very standards they originally promised to uphold. That's absurd.
It is absurd. The original authors also leaned heavily on the claim that their treatments were fundamentally safe, completely dismissing the massive patient surveys documenting severe harm.
Unbelievable.
And they argued that other smaller observational studies had generally supported their approach over the years.
It is just a masterclass in institutional denial.
But the defense of this trial wasn't limited to just the original authors. The medical establishment that had spent a decade promoting these treatments also felt highly threatened.
Right, because if the authors go down, everyone who prescribed it looks bad, too.
Exactly. Which brings us to a highly illuminating analogy offered by a prominent doctor who frequently defended the original trial in the media.
Okay, let's hear this analogy.
To justify the researchers changing their grading rubric in the middle of the experiment, he compared the clinical trial to an ocean liner setting sail from England with a final destination of New York.
Okay.
He argued that on a long, complex journey, a captain inevitably has to make, quote, course corrections based on changing conditions like weather or tides.
I see where this is going.
So he concluded that changing the analysis plan mid-study was simply a necessary course correction, and the ultimate proof of success was that the ship successfully arrived in New York.
Okay, I have to stop you there. That analogy fundamentally entirely misunderstands the entire purpose of the scientific method.
Break it down for us.
You do not design an experiment with a predetermined destination in mind.
Exactly.
You do not set sail with the singular goal of proving your multi-million-pound treatment works and then just make, quote-unquote, course corrections to the data every time it looks like you might fail.
No, you don't.
An experiment is supposed to be an objective exploration to discover if the treatment works at all. If you shoot an arrow, realize it is veering away from the target, and then you just run up to the wall and paint a new target around wherever the arrow lands. You aren't doing science. You are doing public relations.
That ocean liner analogy perfectly encapsulates the trap of confirmation bias. The researchers believed so deeply in their psychological theory of the illness that they viewed any data contradicting it not as a failure of the theory, but just as a minor logistical hurdle to be maneuvered around.
And the reason this deeply entrenched confirmation bias matters so much to you, the listener, even if you never experience a day of chronic fatigue in your entire life.
Right. Why should the average person care?
Because of the monumental real-world fallout. The ripples of this single compromised study affected millions of people who never consented to be part of the experiment.
Absolutely. Because for over a decade, this single trial served as the foundational bedrock for global medical policy. It wasn't just about what a local doctor recommended in a clinic. It directly dictated the policies of massive insurance conglomerates and government disability boards.
Right. Based on the illusion that this severe physical illness was easily curable with basic exercise and talk therapy, insurance companies had the academic ammunition they needed to systematically deny claims.
Yes, telling profoundly disabled individuals, well, the science says you are capable of working, you just need to exercise and stop being afraid.
It weaponized bad science to strip vulnerable people of their financial safety nets. That is the real-world danger here.
It is. And the fallout also highlights a systemic rot within academic publishing itself.
This isn't just an isolated incident, is it?
Unfortunately, no.
Hmm.
The sources detailing this controversy point to a broader, highly alarming statistic regarding the replication crisis in science. Estimates suggest that roughly 50% of published papers in the field of psychology contain reporting errors or rely on data that cannot be independently reproduced.
50%.
Yes, half.
If half of the literature is built on shaky foundations, and the institutions fiercely protect their data from independent review by hiding behind lawyers, the entire concept of evidence-based medicine is compromised.
It really is. The foundational currency of science is transparency. It is the ability of a skeptical peer to look at your raw numbers and verify your conclusions. When a multi-million-pound research team, backed by government authority, refuses to share how they derive their answers, they abandon the scientific method entirely.
Science hidden behind a quarter-million-pound legal wall isn't science. It is dogma.
Well said.
But, I don't want to leave this on a totally depressing note, because the enduring legacy of this controversy isn't just a story of institutional corruption.
No, it's really not.
It is a testament to the staggering capability of the patient community.
The narrative arc here is genuinely inspiring. Think about it. You have a demographic of patients dealing with an illness that actively destroys their physical and cognitive stamina.
Right, just talking can cause a crash.
Exactly. Yet these bedbound, marginalized individuals managed to build a cohesive global network. They taught themselves advanced statistical modeling from their beds.
That's incredible.
They navigated labyrinthine public information laws. They crowdsourced legal strategies to fight a university.
They became the immune system for the scientific method.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
When the elite medical journals, the peer reviewers, and the government oversight committees completely failed to detect or correct a massive statistical illusion, it was the sick patients who stepped in and forced the system to correct itself.
And their actions forced a global reckoning that is still unfolding today. Slowly removing those harmful exercise mandates from medical guidelines worldwide.
But the mechanisms that allowed this flawed trial to dominate medicine for a decade, those are still largely in place, aren't they?
They are. The academic publishing system hasn't fundamentally changed.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question for you to consider as we wrap this up.
The big one.
If a trial this visibly compromised, a trial featuring glowing newsletters handed to patients, mid-game rule changes, and mathematically impossible recovery rates, if that could successfully masquerade as the undisputed global gold standard for over 10 years, simply because the authors refused to hand over their homework, what other accepted fundamental medical facts sitting in our textbooks right now are built on a foundation of secret, unverified data?
It is a question that requires us to maintain a healthy, rigorous skepticism of institutional authority, and to always unequivocally demand to see the raw data.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and see you on the next dive.